The heat clung to the pavement like a second skin, thick and unmoving. Afternoon traffic hummed through the wealthy district, a blur of tinted windows, designer bags, and hurried footsteps. On a shaded corner outside a fancy bakery, a little girl stood with a small plastic container in her hands, the word candy scribbled in fading marker across the lid. Her school shoes were worn, her backpack patched in 2 places, and her hair was tied back with a ribbon that had seen better days. "Candy for 2 rays, sir?" she asked each passerby, voice soft but persistent. Most ignored her. A few smiled without stopping. Some crossed the street altogether. But then he came. He wore a suit that fit him too well to be off the rack, walking like someone used to doors opening before he even reached them. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and he checked his phone twice between steps, barely noticing the world around him. When the girl stepped in front of him, he slowed, annoyed. "Would you like a candy, sir?" she asked again, holding the box up with both hands. Her eyes were wide and too hopeful for someone her age. He opened his mouth to dismiss her, then paused. Something about her face, something in her eyes, made his words stick in his throat. He looked at her more closely now, almost startled by the sensation bubbling up in his chest. She tilted her head and smiled. "You don't have to buy one," she said. "But maybe just look at me for a second." He blinked, taken aback. People didn't speak to him like that. He took a deep breath, nodded once, and pulled a couple of coins from his pocket. "All right," he said. "1 candy." As he handed her the money and she picked out a wrapped sweet, she giggled and said playfully, "Thank you, Daddy." The word hit him like a punch. His body tensed. He looked down at her, expecting a joke, but she was already skipping back toward the shade. To her, it was nothing, a silly word, a game. To him, it was something else, entirely. He turned, took 3 steps, and stopped. He looked back. She was sitting on the curb now, adjusting her shoe, humming a tune to herself as she nibbled on one of her own candies. The heat shimmered around her, distorting the air. Or maybe it was just his vision blurring. His hand tightened around the half-melted sweet in his palm. That word, that single, innocent word, had knocked something loose. It wasn't just her eyes, it was her expression, her mouth, her voice. All of it felt familiar. Number it couldn't be. He shook his head, but his feet didn't move. Something deeper than memory stirred inside him. Something dangerous. Something that had been buried a long time ago. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But for reasons he couldn't explain, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Not now. Not after that. As the cars continued to stream past and the world resumed its indifference, he stood there, staring at a girl who had sold him candy and accidentally opened a door to a part of his past he thought he'd locked forever. The next morning, Isabel tied her shoes with the kind of focus only children in difficult circumstances develop early. Her backpack, slightly too heavy for her frame, was filled not just with books, but with dreams she hadn't yet learned to name. She kissed her grandmother's cheek, a kiss that lingered a little longer than usual, and walked out the door of the small, crumbling house they shared in the hills on the edge of the city. "Don't talk to strangers," her grandmother called out. "I never do," Isabel replied with a grin, even though both of them knew it wasn't exactly true. She took 2 buses to get to school. The first was noisy and packed. The second always smelled like mildew. At school, Isabel was polite, quiet, and invisible. Teachers liked her because she never caused trouble. Classmates barely noticed her. But Isabel didn't mind. She was used to being overlooked, it gave her more time to observe. She noticed how Mr. Carlos, the janitor, always gave more attention to the orchids in the teacher's lounge than to the noisy complaints of the staff. She noticed how Raquel in the third row bit her lip when she got nervous. And she noticed how the new math teacher smiled only when talking about numbers, but never when talking to people. Isabel saw everything. After school, while the other children played or went home, she headed to the wealthy part of town with her box of candies. It was her after-school job, even though no one had ever formally called it that. She stood at her usual corner, outside the bakery where rich people stopped after work, and she waited. Some days she sold nothing. Some days she sold enough for bread and rice. But once in a while, something different happened. Like yesterday. That man, the one with silver hair and the heavy look in his eyes, he had stopped. Really stopped. Looked at her like he wasn't just seeing a child with candy. It was strange. And when she joked and called him Daddy, his whole body had changed. She wasn't sure why she said it. Maybe because it felt natural, like teasing someone she knew. Maybe because it was a word she thought about more often than she admitted. That night, she wrote about it in her notebook. Today, I sold candy to a man who looked like someone from a movie. When I called him Dad, he didn't laugh. He looked scared or sad, maybe both. I wish he really was my dad, or someone like that, someone who sees me. The truth was, Isabel didn't know much about her father. Her grandmother had told her the basics. He was someone from her mother's past, a name never spoken, a ghost never chased. Her mother, Emily, had died when Isabel was 6. Tuberculosis. Too many months of ignoring a cough because they couldn't afford the clinic. Since then, her grandmother had taken care of her. With love, yes, but also with grief. A love tinged with sorrow. After another long afternoon on the corner, Isabel made her way home. The coins in her pocket clinked softly with each step. She kept her eyes down, like she always did, especially in her neighborhood, where looking the wrong person in the eye could invite trouble. Inside, her grandmother was asleep in the chair. Isabel placed the coins in the jar behind the old radio and went to her room. She opened her notebook. She drew the man's face, or tried to. Her drawing skills weren't perfect, but she remembered his eyes clearly, sharp, tired, a little lost. She wrote beneath it, "If I could choose a father, maybe I'd choose him." The next few days returned to routine. No sign of the man, no pause in the steady rhythm of poverty. Her shoes wore thinner. Her grandmother coughed more. She kept selling candies, watching people, writing in her notebook. Then, 5 days later, it happened. She was at her usual corner when she felt a presence before she saw him. She looked up. He was standing across the street pretending to read his phone, but his eyes flickered toward her every few seconds. She smiled. He crossed. "Back for more candy?" she teased, trying to sound casual, though her heart fluttered strangely. He didn't smile, but he nodded. "Yes. I thought it brought good luck the last time." She handed him 2 candies and held out her hand for the coins. This time, he lingered. "What's your name?" he asked. "Isabel," she said. "Yours?" "Edward." They stared at each other for a second longer than made sense. "Why do you sell candy?" he asked gently. "To help my grandma," she said, "and to practice talking to people. I'm shy." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't seem shy." "I pretend I'm not," she replied. He smiled then, a faint thing, but real. That night, Isabel didn't write in her notebook. Instead, she lay on her back, staring at the ceiling and wondering what would happen if Edward never came back, or what would happen if he did. She didn't know it yet, but across the city, Edward was lying awake in a room full of silence and wealth, asking himself the same thing. The morning light filtered through a curtain that didn't quite reach the edges of the window, letting in streaks of gold and dust. Isabel sat on the edge of the small mattress she shared with her grandmother, tying the frayed laces of her sneakers with methodical care. One lace was shorter than the other, and she had to twist it around twice to make it hold. She didn't complain. Complaining didn't change things. Her grandmother coughed in the other room, the dry, rattling kind of cough that always made Isabel pause. She waited. When it passed, she walked quietly into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. "Thank you, sweetheart," her grandmother rasped. Her smile was tired, but real. "Are you going to school and then—" "Yes," Isabel nodded, picking up her faded backpack. "I'll be back before sunset." Her grandmother didn't need to ask what came after school. She already knew. For over a year now, Isabel had been selling candy on the streets after class. It was their unspoken arrangement. The girl would bring home coins, and the old woman would save her strength to cook and keep the house in order. As she left, the sound of the city rising filled her ears. Barking dogs, distant radios, motorcycles. She walked past cracked walls, faded murals stained by water, and kids kicking a bottle cap down the alley. 2 buses, and 40 minutes later, she stepped into a different world. Here, the sidewalks were clean. The buildings had windows that shimmered instead of cracked. The people moved fast, like they had somewhere important to be. It was the kind of place where no one noticed a small girl standing still, unless she was in their way. Isabel didn't mind. Being invisible had its advantages. School was a blur of noise, chalk dust, and whispers. She paid attention in class, answered when called on, and kept to herself. Teachers marked her as quiet but bright. Classmates often forgot she was even in the room. She wasn't bullied, she was simply not remembered. And for someone like Isabel, that was safer. At recess, she didn't run or scream. She sat in the corner near the school wall, sketching in her notebook. Not of things, but of ideas. Half-drawn faces, hands reaching for something, old memories turned into scenes. No one ever asked to see them. After school, she changed out of her uniform skirt and into a longer, worn one. She tucked her candies into a container and caught another bus. Her destination was always the same: a corner outside a bakery in the wealthiest part of the city. There, surrounded by the scent of fresh bread and expensive perfume, she stood with her box labeled "Candy," watching the flow of people like someone studying a river from the bank. Some ignored her. Others gave her a polite but uncomfortable glance. Occasionally, someone would toss her a coin without taking the candy. And then, one afternoon, he appeared. He came from a side street, walking like someone who wasn't used to making space for anyone else. His suit was dark and tailored, his expression unreadable. Silver hair swept back like he'd forgotten how to age slowly. His shoes made no sound, but his presence did. Isabel watched him without expectation. He looked like the kind of man who avoided eye contact. But as he passed, she took a chance. "Candy for 2 rayés, sir?" she asked softly. He paused, just for a second, then turned to look at her fully. There was something about his eyes, not just the color, but the way they searched hers, as if trying to find something he'd forgotten he'd lost. She tilted her head and added playfully, "You don't have to buy one, but maybe just look at me." A strange silence fell between them. For a moment, the city around them faded into background noise. Then he nodded slowly and reached into his pocket. She handed him 2 wrapped candies and flashed her usual cheerful smile. "Thank you, Daddy." She said it without thinking, a joke, a reflex. Something she'd said before when older men bought her candy, just to see how they'd react. But this time, the word landed differently. He froze. Not with polite confusion, not with a chuckle. No, this man froze like someone had been slapped. His jaw clenched, his eyes widened, barely, but enough. Then he turned and walked away. Isabel blinked, unsure of what she had just seen. She watched his back as he disappeared into the crowd. He didn't look back. That night, she wrote about him in her notebook. He didn't laugh. He looked like he saw a ghost. I wonder if I reminded him of someone, or if he remembered something he didn't want to. The days that followed were ordinary again. Rain came and went. She sold less candy. Her grandmother coughed more often, and food became a bit scarcer. The bakery staff stopped noticing her entirely. But on the 5th day, he came back. This time, he didn't pretend to be passing by. He crossed the street directly toward her. "You're back?" she said, smiling. "Didn't like the candy?" "It was fine," he said. "What's your name?" "Isabel," she answered. "What's yours?" "Edward." They stood there, unsure what to say next. "Why do you sell candy?" he asked. "To help my grandma," she said, "and to talk to people. I'm shy." "You don't seem shy." "I pretend I'm not," she replied with a grin. That grin did something to him. He took another candy and placed a folded bill in the box. Then he left. For the next few days, Edward kept coming back. Sometimes he bought 1 candy. Sometimes he bought them all. He didn't always speak, but he always looked at her with the same intensity, as if her face held a secret he was trying to unlock. Other passers-by started to notice. "You've got a regular?" one man joked one afternoon. "That one's hooked." Isabel just smiled. But something in her was changing. A thread of hope, so thin it almost hurt, began to weave its way into her thoughts. She didn't know why Edward kept returning, but he did. And for now, that was enough. One evening, just before sunset, she stayed later than usual. The crowds had thinned, the bakery lights dimmed. She was about to leave when she noticed a black car parked across the street. The windows were tinted, but she felt eyes on her. She stared for a long moment, then turned away and walked home. Her steps were slow, intentional, not afraid but aware. At home, her grandmother was asleep in the old armchair, a blanket draped over her knees. Isabel placed her earnings in the jar behind the radio and tiptoed into her room. She opened her notebook and stared at a blank page. Then, slowly, she drew Edward's eyes. Not perfectly, but with something close to understanding. Below them, she wrote, "Sometimes people look at you like they're trying to remember who they used to be." That night, the wind howled through the cracks in the wall. Rain tapped the roof in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. And far across the city, in a house filled with silence and memory, Edward sat in a dark room, staring at nothing, hearing only the echo of a single word. Daddy. Edward Andrade had everything a man could buy. A sprawling penthouse in the heart of São Paulo, staff that worked in silence, a closet full of tailored suits, and investments that multiplied while he slept. Yet there were mornings he sat on the edge of his king-sized bed, staring at the floor, unable to summon the will to move. There was a time when ambition had burned in his chest like fire. Now it felt more like smoke, thick, suffocating, and directionless. He avoided mirrors, not because he hated his reflection, but because it reminded him of the years he could never get back. His face had changed, of course, with deeper lines, more tired eyes. But it wasn't aging that haunted him. It was the emptiness behind his gaze, the slow erosion of something human. He told himself he had made peace with the past. He had buried mistakes, walked away from regret. Life had demanded choices, and he had made them, some with clarity, others with cowardice. Either way, time had moved forward. He had survived, succeeded, grown cold, until her, a girl with frayed shoes and steady eyes, had looked up at him and called him Daddy. And the ground beneath him had shifted. He had replayed that moment 100 times. The way she said it, teasing maybe, innocent even. But her tone had triggered something deeper than memory. It felt like truth spoken by accident. He hadn't planned to go back to that street corner. But 3 days later, he found himself parked across from the bakery again, engine off, watching from behind the safety of tinted glass. She was there, just like before, selling candy with the quiet resolve of someone who had already learned how to survive. She was so young, so small, but the way she stood, the calm in her posture, it reminded him of someone. Not just physically, but emotionally. Someone who had once stood quietly beside him in elevators. Someone who smiled without showing all her teeth. Emily. The name arrived uninvited, slicing through his thoughts. Emily Lima. It had been more than 15 years, but the sound of her laughter still echoed if he let it. He had met her when he was newly promoted at Andrade Logistics, still idealistic, still naive about how power worked in his family. She worked in the company cafeteria, timid, graceful, always humming a tune. They had started with conversations about books, then life. He remembered how she listened, really listened, as if every word mattered. She had a way of lowering his defenses without even trying. And he was young, reckless, full of himself. He believed love could defy structure, that affection alone could outrun expectation. But his parents didn't share that belief. When his mother found out, the confrontation was swift and brutal. Emily was accused of manipulation, of chasing status. Edward had tried to defend her, but not enough. His father threatened to cut him off financially. At the time, Edward didn't have the courage to face exile. He ended it, like a coward, sending a message through HR that she was being transferred. He never saw her again, and he never knew what happened after. Until now. There was no mistaking the girl's eyes. They were Emily's, shape, color, softness, but with something new behind them. Strength, curiosity. She wasn't just Emily's daughter. She was her own person. Could it be? Could she? He told himself it was impossible. Emily would have contacted him, wouldn't she? Told him she was pregnant? Surely someone would have reached out. Or maybe not. Maybe she had been too proud. Maybe she believed he didn't care. And maybe she had been right. The next day, Edward returned and crossed the street. He bought a candy, then another. He asked her name. Isabel, she had said. It hit him like thunder. It was a name Emily had once said she loved. Beautiful, strong, timeless. He had barely managed to respond. Gave his own name, half hoping she might recognize it. She hadn't. Or she hid it well. Each evening, Edward felt himself changing. He, who had lived behind glass and stone, was beginning to feel the stirrings of something unfamiliar. Need. Not just guilt or curiosity, but something warmer. more dangerous. He didn't know what to do with it. He spent his nights pacing the cold floors of his penthouse, the silence almost unbearable. He stopped answering personal calls, told his driver to be on standby every afternoon, stared too long at empty walls. One evening, she showed him a sketch in her notebook. It was simple. A man walking away, drawn from behind. Isabel explained it casually. This is someone I made up. He doesn't know that someone loves him. Edward felt the weight of her words press against his ribs. Maybe he knows, he said quietly. Maybe he just doesn't think he deserves it. She looked up, genuinely puzzled. Why wouldn't someone deserve love? He didn't answer. He couldn't. The question followed him home. He spent hours that night searching for Emily. First online, then through company records. Most files were outdated, incomplete. HR told him she had resigned years ago. No next of kin listed, no address, no records past her final paycheck. Dead ends. He felt a panic he hadn't known in years, as if time was slipping through his hands again. And this time, he didn't want to let it. He began going earlier, watching longer, memorizing Isabel's routine. He saw how she packed her candy box, how she folded her skirt just so, how she always gave exact change, never asked for pity. She was proud, just like her mother. The guilt burned in him now. He had turned away from Emily, left her alone. And if Isabel was truly his daughter, then he had turned away from a child too. For years, for her whole life. The thought made him sick. He needed to know. So he followed her, from a respectful distance, staying in the shadows. Isabel walked through the city with purpose, crossed streets without hesitation, knew when to look over her shoulder and when to keep her head down. She led him through winding alleys and up cracked staircases, past kids playing barefoot in puddles, past women cooking over open flames, to a house barely holding itself up, painted blue once, now mostly gray. She entered. He stood there, his heart beat loud in his ears. It took all his strength not to walk up and knock, not to ask, not to fall to his knees and say, "Tell me. Tell me if I failed you." Instead, he stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. That night, he sat in his car for nearly an hour before going home. When he finally stepped inside his apartment, the lights seemed too bright, the silence too sharp. He poured a drink and didn't touch it. Opened the drawer and stared at the old wedding photo of Lucia. For the first time, he spoke aloud in that empty room. "I think I have a daughter," he whispered. "And she doesn't know who I am, and I don't know how to earn the right to tell her." He sat on the edge of the bed as dawn approached, the city below flickering with headlights and streetlights, unaware of the storm inside him. The mirror still stood untouched in the hallway. But for the first time in years, he didn't turn away from it. He walked toward it slowly, stared at his reflection. His face looked the same, but his eyes, they were different now. Haunted, hopeful, human. Edward felt the street beneath his shoes in a way he hadn't since he was a young man, walking to meetings with nothing but ambition and hunger in his chest. But this wasn't the same kind of hunger. This was the ache of something long lost, something he wasn't sure he ever had, but now couldn't live without. He had made up his mind. No more watching from afar, no more hiding behind tinted glass or half-truths. The time for fear had passed. That girl was his daughter. Every instinct screamed it. The timeline, the eyes, the way she looked at him. But even more than the evidence, it was the feeling. That deep, unshakable pull. Like gravity had shifted, and she was now the center of everything. He wasn't ready, but he couldn't wait. She was sitting in her usual spot when he arrived, her little candy box resting against her knees. Her hair was tied back with a red ribbon today, and her expression was more focused than usual. She was sketching something in a notebook balanced across her lap, oblivious to the noise around her. Edward took a moment to watch her before stepping forward. "Drawing me again?" he asked with a half smile. She looked up, startled, then laughed. "I could, but your nose is hard to get right." He chuckled. "Most people say that about my attitude." She closed her notebook and stood, brushing imaginary dust from her skirt. "No candy today? I came for something else." "Oh? I'd like to walk you home, if that's okay." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not suspicious exactly, but cautious. She had seen enough of the world to know not to say yes too quickly. "Why?" He hesitated. Then simply, "Because I think it's time I met your grandmother." There was a beat of silence. Then she handed him the candy box. "You carry it," she said. "It's part of the deal." The path to Isabel's house wound through narrow alleys and broken pavement, up a hill that most people from Edward's world had never walked. It wasn't just physically difficult. It was humbling. Every cracked tile, every barefoot child darting between cars, every mural peeling on a weather-stained wall reminded him that this was a world he had once turned away from. Isabel didn't talk much on the way, but she didn't seem nervous either. Occasionally, she'd point something out. A dog she liked, a shortcut she didn't take anymore because the boys there had started bothering girls. Edward listened closely, storing every word like treasure. At the top of the hill stood the little blue house, tucked between two larger, more decrepit buildings. It leaned slightly to the left, its paint faded, its windows covered with cloth instead of curtains. Isabel pushed the door open. "Grandma, I'm home. I brought someone with me." The house smelled of beans, soap, and something sweet, maybe eucalyptus. The kind of scent that clings to your clothes and stays there, like memory. The woman who stepped into the room was shorter than Edward remembered. Her body had curved inward with age, but her eyes were sharp, dark, and unblinking, like she'd seen too much and trusted too little. He remembered her vaguely from long ago. Emily's mother. She had always been polite but distant with him, even when Emily brought him to the small apartment they once rented briefly. She never said much, but Edward knew she didn't approve of the class difference. Or maybe she just didn't like what she sensed in him, that his love wasn't strong enough to stand up to pressure. Now, face to face again after nearly 2 decades, she said nothing. She just studied him like a threat. "Good afternoon," he said quietly. She nodded once. "Sit." Edward sat. Isabel didn't speak. She curled up on the floor beside a low bookshelf, flipping through her sketchbook again. There was a long pause. "Does she know who I am?" he asked gently, gesturing toward Isabel. The old woman's jaw tightened. "She's not stupid. Children know more than you think." He nodded. "I didn't know Emily was pregnant. I swear to you. I never got her messages. She tried to contact me. Twice. Left voicemails. Called your office. She said your assistant never passed them on." Edward's stomach turned. That would have been Luciana. Cold, efficient, and fiercely loyal to his family. She would have buried those messages the second she saw Emily's name. "I didn't abandon her. He stopped himself. "I let her go. Because I was a coward. I let my parents tell me she wasn't good enough, and I was too weak to fight back." "You're not the first," the old woman said flatly. "And you won't be the last. She loved me, Edward said. His voice cracked. And I loved her. I didn't love her loud enough. There was a silence so deep it seemed to hum. I thought about her every year, he continued, especially after my wife passed. I wondered where she was. I tried to forget her, but I never really did. The woman turned her gaze to Isabel. You want to be in her life now. Why? Because she looks like someone you lost? No, he said. Because she's someone I found, someone I was meant to find. And I want to be part of her life. If she'll let me. The old woman studied him for a long time. Then, slowly, she stood and walked to a drawer in a narrow cabinet. From it, she pulled a faded blue notebook. She placed it in front of him. This is hers, she said. Read it. He opened it carefully. It was full of short stories, poems, scribbled thoughts. Childlike handwriting, but a strong voice. Then he saw it. A page titled, If I Could Talk to My Dad. His hands trembled as he read. Sometimes I wonder if he ever walked past me and didn't know I was his. Maybe he was busy, or sad, or both. If I met him, I would say it's okay, that I'm not angry, that I just wanted to know his name, so I could stop pretending he was someone in my drawings. He couldn't finish the page. His eyes were wet, his breath shallow. Isabel watched him silently. I want to be better, Edward said, closing the notebook. Not to fix the past, I can't, but to give her a future, a real one. The old woman didn't answer. Instead, she stood again, slowly this time, and said, Then you come. Not with promises, not with gifts, with presents. I will. After that day, Edward returned every afternoon. He carried the candy box. He walked her home. He listened. Isabel didn't ask for anything. She didn't test him. She just let him be there. As if some part of her had been waiting all along. On the third visit, she showed him a drawing of her mother. She used to sing to me, she said, even when she was too sick to stand. Edward nodded, unable to speak. I think she would have liked you, Isabel added. He looked at her, startled. You do? Yes, but only if you kept your promises. I will. She smiled. Then she would have liked you. On the seventh day, as they sat on the front steps sharing a guava pastry, Isabel turned to him suddenly. Did you ever think about having kids? The question came out of nowhere, but Edward had the answer immediately. Yes, I thought about it for a long time. My wife and I, we tried. It never happened. Maybe it wasn't supposed to. Maybe not. But I think you were supposed to find me. He turned to her. Why do you say that? Because I wasn't lost. That silence between them, warm and full, said more than any explanation could. He placed a hand on hers. She didn't pull away. Edward sat alone in his dimly lit study, the soft hum of the city outside his window, a distant murmur. The notebook lay open on his desk, Amanda's handwriting dancing across the pages like whispers from another time. Each word pulled him deeper into memories he had long buried, memories that now surged forth with relentless clarity. He remembered the first time he saw Amanda. She was standing in the break room of his father's company, her laughter a melodic contrast to the sterile environment. Her eyes sparkled with life, and her presence was a breath of fresh air in a world suffocated by expectations and pretense. Their connection had been instant, a magnetic pull that defied logic. Late-night conversations, shared dreams, and stolen moments became their sanctuary. But the weight of Edward's lineage loomed over them, a constant reminder of the chasm between their worlds. His father's disapproval was swift and unforgiving. She's not one of us, he had said. his voice cold and final. Edward, torn between love and duty, made the choice that haunted him to this day. He let Amanda go, convincing himself it was for the best. Now, with the revelation of Isabel's existence, the magnitude of his mistake was undeniable. Amanda had faced the trials of life alone, raising their daughter without his support. The guilt was a heavy shroud, suffocating and unrelenting. Edward closed the notebook, his hands trembling. The past could not be changed, but perhaps, just perhaps, the future held a chance for redemption. The next morning, Edward woke early, not because of an alarm, but because of a deep, unresolved pressure in his chest, the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. He showered without thought, dressed in silence, and skipped breakfast. Food meant nothing, sleep even less. There was only one thing on his mind: Amanda. She had once told him that silence could kill love faster than anger. At least when someone's angry, she said, they still care enough to fight. Edward hadn't fought. He'd gone silent. He drove without direction, hoping the motion would quiet his thoughts. Instead, it stirred more of them. Every turn brought him closer to something he had buried for years. Eventually, he found himself in a neighborhood he hadn't visited in nearly 2 decades. The building was still there. Amanda's old apartment. It had aged, like everything else, but traces of her lingered, not in the paint or the windows, but in the ghost of memory that clung to the place. He parked and sat across the street, the engine off, his heart louder than any traffic. He saw her again in his mind, barefoot, leaning on the railing, her hair tied with a yellow ribbon. The way she used to hold a cup of coffee with both hands, warming herself not just from the drink, but from his presence. His throat tightened. Had she thought of him when she was sick? Had she looked at Isabel and seen his face? How many nights had she prayed for him to show up? And how many mornings had she given up? He got out of the car and walked to the building's door, ran his fingers over the rusty handle. Nothing had changed here, except everything. Later that afternoon, Edward visited the cemetery. Amanda's grave was tucked beneath a jacaranda tree, its purple blossoms falling gently onto the stone. Her headstone was modest: Amanda Lewis, Nitten Odyssex till Chuechuane. Mother, daughter, loved. It was the word loved that broke him. He fell to his knees beside the grave, hand flat against the earth. I should have been here, he whispered. I should have known. I should have never left you. A soft breeze rustled the tree branches above. He took it as a sign, not forgiveness, but presence. I met her, he continued. A daughter. She's more than I ever deserved. She's brilliant, brave. She sees the world like you did, wide open, but not naive. His voice cracked. I'm going to try. I swear to you, Amanda, I will be the man I should have been. For her. For you. He stayed until the sun began to set. And even then, he didn't want to leave. Only when the caretaker walked by, sweeping petals from the path, did Eduardo rise and whisper goodbye. Back at Isabella's house, the sky now awash in orange and pink, she waited for him. You're late, she said, arms crossed, though her smile betrayed her relief. I had somewhere important to be. More important than helping me carry the candy box. He lifted it from her hands without answering. They walked in comfortable silence, the kind that only forms between two people beginning to understand each other. Finally, Isabella spoke. Did you love my mom? He looked at her, startled. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just curious, needing. Yes, he said. I loved her, and I was afraid. Afraid of what? of not being enough, of losing everything. And in trying to keep everything, I lost what mattered most. She didn't respond right away. Then, I think she still loved you. He blinked back sudden tears. Why? Because she never said a bad word about you, not even once. They reached the house, and before she went inside, she turned. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Dinner at the little blue house was simple. Rice, beans, and a slice of pumpkin. Eduardo didn't speak much, but he helped set the table. The grandmother didn't comment, but she noticed. Isabella told a story about a girl at school who tried to sell handmade bracelets during recess and got caught. She laughed while telling it. Eduardo watched her more than he ate. After dinner, Isabella disappeared into the back room, leaving Eduardo alone in the kitchen with the old woman. She stood near the sink, rinsing a pan under weak water pressure. I went to Amanda's grave today, Eduardo said, voice low. The clink of metal paused for a moment. She deserved more than I gave her, he added. The woman didn't turn around. She didn't expect much, not after what happened. She should have, he said. She should have expected everything. Only then did she look at him. Her eyes were still sharp, but something in them had softened, just a little. She was proud, you know, she said. Too proud to beg you to stay, and too strong to speak badly of you when you left. He nodded, and I was too weak to deserve either of those things. She forgave you, the old woman said. He looked at her, stunned. How do you know? She told me. In the hospital. She said, if he ever comes back, tell him I forgave him a long time ago. But don't let him hurt Isabella. Eduardo felt the words hit like a wave. I won't, he said. I swear it. The old woman returned to the dishes, her back turned once more. Then prove it, not just to her, to yourself. Later that night, Eduardo sat on the front steps with Isabella beside him. The sky above was deep and full of stars, the kind that rarely show themselves in the richer parts of town. Do you believe people can change? He asked her suddenly. She didn't answer immediately. I think people don't really change all at once, she said. I think they change by doing one thing differently, then another. And then one day they wake up and they're not who they were. He looked at her, marveling at how old her words sounded in such a young voice. Do you think I'm changing? She turned to him, studied his face the way artists study light. You're trying, she said. And that's something. They sat in silence for a long while. Eventually, she rested her head lightly against his arm. And Eduardo, the man who had once feared love because it might cost him comfort, closed his eyes and felt something burn inside him again. But this time, it wasn't the fire of guilt. It was the fire of becoming. Eduardo stood in front of the little blue house just as the sun crept up behind the hills, bathing the street in a soft, amber glow. His fingers hovered near the door, but didn't touch it yet. He had knocked many times before, on glass doors of boardrooms, on opportunity, on the future. But none had ever made his heart pound like this one. This door was different. It didn't care about status. It didn't open for wealth. It would only yield to truth. And even then, reluctantly. He finally knocked, once, twice, then stepped back and waited. The door opened, creaking like something alive. The old woman stood in the frame. Her eyes scanned him slowly, not suspicious, but exhausted from the weight of too many promises broken by men who looked like him. She's not home, she said without greeting. I know. I saw her leave earlier, he replied softly. I didn't come for her. She raised an eyebrow. Then for what? For you. She let out a dry breath. God help me. She moved aside. Come in, then. Eduardo stepped into the house. Everything was as he remembered. The faint scent of eucalyptus and soap. The radio murmuring an old samba, the furniture arranged like memory itself. He followed her to the kitchen, where she sat at the small wooden table and gestured toward the other chair. He sat. The light coming through the curtain was warm and dusty, catching in the air like a faded photograph. Speak, she said. Eduardo looked at his hands. I know I don't deserve to ask anything of you, but I want to stay in Isabella's life, fully, not on the edges. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she poured herself a cup of coffee. No sugar, no milk. You know what it means to stay, she finally said. It means being there when the fever hits at midnight, when she brings home a bad grade and cries into her pillow, when she asks you why her mother died and all you want to do is run. I know, he said. No, she snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. You don't. You know absence. You know silence. You know how to walk away dressed as a man who believes he did the right thing. Her words landed with weight. Eduardo didn't flinch. He had come to bleed. I'm not proud of who I was. You were young, she said. But so was Amanda. And she didn't get to run. She stayed, sick, tired. She worked until her body quit. And when she died, she left me a child who asked about you every year. A silence settled between them. Not awkward, sacred. I'm not here to erase anything, Eduardo said. Only to take responsibility now, while there's still time. She leaned forward. Then show me who you are now. Bring her into your world, not as a visitor, as your daughter. He nodded slowly. I will. Tomorrow. She held his gaze. If she comes back to me crying, you'll regret ever knocking on my door. Eduardo met her eyes. She won't. The next morning, Isabella waited at the school gate, her sketchbook under her arm. You sure this isn't weird? She asked. A little, Eduardo admitted. But important. She climbed into the car, and they drove toward the financial district. As the skyline sharpened in the windshield, Isabella's grip on the sketchbook tightened. When they arrived, the receptionists at Andrade Logistics looked up in mild confusion. Eduardo walked tall, his hand on Isabella's shoulder. This is my daughter, he said clearly. She's spending the day with me. A beat of stunned silence, then nods, awkward smiles, whispers. Isabella noticed it all. He brought her into the executive suite, showed her world maps with shipping routes and real-time dashboards full of numbers. You move boxes? She asked. Eduardo chuckled. Pretty much. And people pay you millions for that? Billions, actually. She looked unimpressed. Should have started a candy business. Later, in the company lounge, two executives walked by. One stopped. Is this your... Yes, Eduardo said. This is Isabella, my daughter. The man smiled stiffly. Of course, how wonderful. He left quickly. People look at me funny, Isabella whispered. They're adjusting. To what? To someone real. In the evening, Eduardo brought her home. His home. She stepped into the penthouse and looked around. It's cold, she said. It's quiet, he corrected. It's cold. The kind of cold that hides inside the walls. She opened the fridge. Empty. I usually eat out. She opened a cabinet. Plates, plates, plates. But no food. He laughed nervously. She didn't. She walked to the balcony, stood in the golden light of sunset. The view is pretty, she said. but it makes me feel small." He joined her. "I used to think this was the top of the world. And now? Now I think I built it to stay safe and empty." She looked at him, her eyes older than her years. "Can I draw here?" "Anywhere you want." "Even on the windows?" He smiled. "Especially the windows." That night, Eduardo didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, opened his safe, and pulled out documents that once defined his legacy. He tore one of them in half. The next day, he met with his lawyer. "I want to change my will," he said. "Add a trust in Amanda's name. Fund art programs for public schools. And give Isabella full legal recognition." The lawyer blinked. "Are you certain?" "More than I've ever been." Then he held a press conference. In the main lobby of Andrade Logistics, under the watchful eyes of reporters, shareholders, and employees, he stood at the podium. "I've made mistakes," he said. "Not in business, in life. I lost someone who mattered, and I nearly lost the daughter she left me." He paused. "This is Isabella Lima Andrade." Cameras flashed. The room murmured. He looked to the back, where Isabella stood with her grandmother, sketchbook in hand. She didn't wave, but she smiled. Weeks later at school, Isabella stood on stage for a class presentation. She cleared her throat. "I was supposed to talk about someone I admire. I thought about my mom, but today I want to talk about someone new." She looked at Eduardo in the audience. "He didn't come when I was little, but he came when it mattered. He doesn't pretend to be perfect. He shows up, he listens, he learns." She smiled. That night, back on the same park bench where they had once shared awkward silence, Eduardo sat beside her again. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "The press, the speech, the name, because it was already yours?" he said. "I was just afraid to say it out loud." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a sketch. It was him, not distant, not blurred, smiling, open. "You look better like this," she said. "I feel better like this." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think Mom would have liked you." Eduardo didn't answer, but his hand found hers and didn't let go. Some words are easy to say. "I'm sorry. I'll change. I love you." But in the world Isabella had grown up in, words were just sounds. What mattered was what came after. Who stayed, who showed up, who kept their promise when the air turned cold and the silence between two people got heavy. That's what Eduardo was beginning to understand. The first test came 2 weeks after the press conference. It started with a phone call, one Eduardo would never forget. "Mr. Andrade, this is Marisa from Escola Novo Horizonte. Isabella fainted during gym class. She's stable, but we recommend you come quickly." He was in a meeting. 3 vice presidents sat around a marble table discussing expansion in Singapore. Eduardo stood without a word and walked out. No explanation, no hesitation. The elevator ride down felt like it took hours. His driver met him curbside, and when Eduardo said where they were going, the man's hands shook slightly on the wheel. He arrived at the school in record time. Isabella was sitting upright in the nurse's office, sipping water, a damp cloth on her forehead. "You didn't have to come so fast," she murmured when he stepped in. "I did," he said, "and I always will." Her eyes softened. It was just low blood sugar. "Still," he said, kneeling beside her, "I needed to see you." The nurse looked at them. "She'll be fine. She just skipped breakfast, and it's been a hot day." He turned to Isabella, eyebrows raised. She looked guilty. "I was finishing a drawing," she said. "Forgot to eat." Eduardo smiled and reached into his pocket. He handed her a protein bar, the kind he kept on hand for long meetings. "You're more important than any drawing," he said. "I'm not used to people showing up," she whispered after the nurse had left. He met her eyes. "Then I guess I'll just have to keep showing up." Later that week, Eduardo asked her if she'd like to spend the weekend at his apartment. Just the two of them. Movies, cooking, maybe a walk in the park. She hesitated. "Do I get to bring my sketchbooks?" "Only if I get to see the secret pages," he teased. She smiled but didn't answer. The next day, she showed up with a small duffel bag and a serious expression. "No mates," she said. "Agreed. And no pretending I'm someone else." He nodded. "Never." That night, they made spaghetti. It was a disaster. Too much salt, the noodles stuck together, and Eduardo accidentally dropped a plate. Isabella laughed so hard she cried. "Mom would have loved this," she said between breaths. They watched a movie, and for the first time, she fell asleep on his shoulder. Mouth slightly open, hand still holding his shirt like she was afraid he might vanish. He didn't move all night. The next morning, she found him sitting on the balcony, sipping coffee and reading a letter. "What's that?" He handed it to her. It was a handwritten note. From Amanda, dated 2010. It had been buried in an old notebook she'd left behind. The grandmother had found it recently, tucked between grocery lists and song lyrics. "If you ever read this, it means you came back. I hope you came back. I hope you're ready. She'll test you, you know. She won't trust you easily. But if you stay, she'll love you harder than anyone ever has." Isabella's hand trembled slightly. "She wrote that for you?" "She wrote it for us." That afternoon, they visited the art supply store. Isabella walked the aisles like a priestess in a temple, reverent, silent, touching brushes and canvases like they held secrets. Eduardo bought her everything she paused at. When they reached the cashier, the woman behind the counter smiled. "Is this for school?" Isabella looked at Eduardo, then back. "No," she said. "This is for real life." But real life wasn't always beautiful. A week later, Eduardo received a call from a former business associate, a powerful man, deeply conservative and always polite on the surface. "I saw the article," the man said. "The one about your daughter." Eduardo didn't respond. "She's from before your wife, I take it?" "Yes." "And the mother?" "Amanda Lima." A pause. "That cafeteria girl?" Eduardo's voice went cold. "That woman raised my daughter alone. Don't speak of her like that." "I meant no offense, of course," the man said quickly. "It's just, some people are talking. It's unusual." "Good," Eduardo said. "Let them talk." And he hung up. The pressure came quietly after that. Contracts were delayed. Invitations went unextended. A subtle retreat from people who had once smiled too easily. Eduardo noticed. But he didn't care. He had spent years building walls. Now he was learning to tear them down, one judgment at a time. At home, Isabella started leaving little notes around the apartment. On the fridge, "Buy more cookies." On the bathroom mirror, "Brush your teeth. You're not that old." Inside his jacket pocket, "You looked sad today. Smile more, or I'll draw you frowning forever." Each one melted him a little more. But the biggest test came on a Saturday. Rain poured over the city, washing the streets clean. Eduardo was supposed to meet Isabella at a local exhibit for young artists. She had submitted a piece anonymously. Only he knew which one was hers. But on the way there, traffic snarled. His driver panicked. The clock ticked. For a moment, the old Eduardo, The man who calculated losses and adjusted strategy resurfaced. Maybe it's fine. Maybe she won't mind if I'm late. Maybe she won't notice. Then he remembered the note in his jacket. You looked sad today. Smile more. And he told the driver to stop. In the rain, Eduardo got out, ran the last 5 blocks, soaked, breathless, shoes ruined. He arrived just as the director stepped up to present the award. And the winner, chosen by the curators for emotional truth and originality, goes to Girl on the Curb by Isabella Lima. Applause. Eduardo pushed through the crowd. Isabella stood on stage, eyes wide, searching. She saw him, drenched, smiling, mouth open, breathing hard. She covered her face and began to cry. Not because she won, but because he came, because he ran, because he was there. Later, under a canopy outside, she handed him a napkin to dry his face. You look like a lost cat. Worth it. Even the shoes? He looked down, especially the shoes. She pulled something from her bag, a new sketch. It was him, standing in the rain, looking for her. Proof, she said quietly. He looked at her. What? You proved it. That night, back at the apartment, they sat together on the couch, surrounded by wet clothes and snacks. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Why did it take you so long? He thought about lying, but he didn't. Because I thought love was a reward, not a responsibility. And because I was scared. She nodded. I was scared too. Of what? That I'd love you, and you'd leave. He reached out, pulled her close. I won't. She leaned her head against his chest. I know. Love doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a man, running through rain. Sometimes it's a girl, drawing that moment so she'll never forget. And sometimes it's just staying, quietly, always.